Well, good evening everybody, and can you hear me? Yes. Great. Thanks for coming along, and I trust you've all been enjoying this fantastic exhibition celebrating Photographer of the Year. So just a little brief introduction about myself. I'm a full-time landscape photographer, so I've been selling my work of New Zealand landscapes through my network of galleries and my website for the last 16 years. And it's often debated, is photography really art? So I've put together a slideshow here, so there's a series of shots here where I've tried to go into the background of some of these images and also some short video clips. Unfortunately I've got sound, but I hope that will sort of give you a little bit more behind the scenes of what goes into some of these images. Yeah, hopefully that will convince anybody that's not sure that photography is indeed a powerful art form. In this digital age, the fact that we all have a capable camera in our pockets is fantastic because it makes photography very accessible to all ages and abilities. But personally, it's quite frustrating when I see on social media this plethora of apps that can turn a very average photograph into a great one at just the simple touch of a button. So that's just one of the little challenges that we face, because I know I've heard it before, oh, that's just a photograph. But hopefully explaining some of these images behind some of these will portray what's really involved. So if I could start with my first image here, to Kaitiaki, which is of course my entry into the exhibition here. So this was taken out at the Manukau Heads last winter. And as is often the case, this is not what I actually had in mind when I ventured out here early that morning. I was actually looking to capture the sunrise, the first light. From out here you get a fantastic perspective of Auckland City with the various landforms and with Rangitoto just off to the right of the Sky Tower. But what happened is when the sun came above the horizon, this fog just exploded and quickly enveloped the whole harbour, and the view of the city was completely covered, which is when I suddenly just looked off to my shoulder and I saw this scene developing. So if I just click through here, so obviously this is what we see here as a frame piece, but if I just show you here, this was actually, oh sorry, here it is, an interior, but here we go. So the one which I've chosen here is actually the third frame out of 8 scenes that I captured, and this was over a period of about 10 minutes. So the fog was moving quite quickly, and so I kept taking shots as I felt, but it was that third frame which I thought just struck the right balance and composition. It's quite subtle, the differences between each one, but when I go back to the image here, just somehow having that cloud at the top there just really mirrors the bottom. It's quite subtle, these little differences I find. It drives you crazy some days when you're sitting there editing some images, but the devil is in the detail. Moving on in a similar way, this image that I captured, I called this the Circle of Life, again was one of those occasions where that was not what I was actually looking to capture this evening. We had a heavy bank of cloud on the west coast near Karamea with a very thin, clear slit on the western horizon, which I knew would mean a dramatic sunset. So I actually, the next slide here is just a close-up of this the splash. It just shows you a little bit more detail. But if I go on here, here's a short video clip that I took at the time of what I thought I was going to take. So you can see here, you've got this heavy cloud and just a narrow slit on the horizon for the sun to squeeze through. But when I arrived out there, I set myself up on the banks of the river there. I thought the sun was going to dip below the horizon and light up the riverbank here, which is covered in nikau and reflect in the river. So you can see here, this is where I was, but then when the sun actually came down, all of this was in shadow, this area here by the bridge was in light, so I was like, oh, quick plan B. So I quickly swapped lenses and sprinted down to the water's edge. And if I just go to the next frame here, I just happened to notice this rock that was just above the surface of the sea. And I thought, oh great, I'll try and see what happens here. So I focused on the rock and just started capturing a sequence of images as the waves were coming over that. And then the fourth frame, which is actually this one, the fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The fifth frame there just captured that perfect circular splash. And the next frame after that. So, you know, this image, more than any other I have captured, really, evokes that moment in time, you know, and I think that's the power of photography, to portray a moment that would not necessarily be visible to the naked eye. So it's quite powerful, I think. This next image here, which I call Tropical Tones, was on the Heafy track the following day. And I deliberately wanted a vintage feel with this image, so I chose this particular frame, and I printed this onto metallic canvas, which has unique pearlescent qualities and really great sharpness. So I was looking for that period feel. And if I show you here, this was the original image. So this was actually 4 frames which I stitched together. And you can see here, these are the 4 individual frames. By stitching separate, and rather than taking just one frame, some of you here may be familiar with this technique of where you can stitch together multiple frames, which gives you a much bigger file, but much more effective in sepia than colour, I think. This next image here, Beautiful Bonsai, was up the Cobb Valley near Antarctica last October. I delayed my hike a couple of days to coincide with the forecast where fresh snow was going to fall. So I captured this little short video clip. So I'll just show you this here. It was just amazing. I mean, that's full colour, but it's almost black and white. It was just like a winter wonderland. This is where iPhones are just so great just to have in your pocket and to capture these other images just as background shots. You can really tell the story with. It looks almost oriental, sort of Japanese. And then, so here we are on the left, the same shot. On the right was this image of the Cobb hut, which I captured the next day. I retraced my steps back down the track, and I'd set the camera up, ready. I was just waiting for the sun to come out, and just as the sun burst through some cloud, this little weka happened to walk into view. You know, and I think it's just so great if you can capture, you can add those little details. You know, without the weka, it would still be a lovely little cute hut, but just having that extra detail. So I called this one Wicked Weka. That morning when I was staying at Vanilla Hut, there was a young family, and one of the young boys had his boots outside, just on the veranda, and I was up on my bunk at the time, and I just heard these yells and screams because this weka had picked up this boy's boot and was running into the bushes. So they were like, quick, you know, and they managed to, you know, I think the weka dropped the boot, fortunately. It had been a long 4-hour walk out with one boot, so hence the name Wicked Weka. The next image here, this sheep in the apple orchard down in Roxburgh has been a popular print, but this was just before, I managed to capture this just before the dog barking spoiled it all, and then this one on the right of Jersey cows coming out of the milking shed in the morning. You know, a lot of these images, it's all about being in the right place at the right time. This image here, which I call Bonjour Akaroa, is a bit of a classic of mine, but I had to get quite cunning to capture this. So the next slide here, this little one down here in the left corner. I had a friend of mine, Sidle, along for the trip, and Sidle's mum, we call her Auntie Di, bakes the best chocolate chip cookies. And when we arrived at the pier this morning, I thought, oh great, gulls on the pier, that'll be cool. But of course we had to wait some time for the sun to rise. So I said to Sidle, have we got any cookies left? So we had four of the best chocolate chip cookies, which Sidle duly broke into crumbs and rationed along the railing to keep the gulls there, just a bit of a bribe. And then there's always one bossy gull, and I pointed him out here, I think that's him there. So he wanted all the cookies to himself and kept shooing the gulls away. But then just as the light was right and the gulls settled down for what seemed like just a couple of seconds, this guy just on the right, in the third frame there, he had said g'day as he was going out earlier. He just happened to be rowing back ashore at the same time, and then unbeknownst to me, Sidle actually shot me actually shooting the gulls, and there on the bottom right, as the sun got higher, of course the light changes so quickly, so you just got to really think on your feet and work so quickly. And here it is. I got sent this image on the left from a client in the UK who had taken the canvas back home, rolled up loose, and she framed it in a white frame. And then this was in a show home in Karaka a few years ago in the black. This next image here, Bonjour Akaroa, that last one, is just about sold out now. So the gallery that I have at Little River on the way out to Akaroa, I needed something fresh for the gallery there. So I went back to the area this July and came across this wharf at Wainui, which is on the opposite side of the harbour to Akaroa. You can see Akaroa here in the distance. So when I arrived here, I thought, oh great, gulls again. The seagulls were lined up on the railing, waiting for the fishing boat to return. So I captured 5 separate frames which I stitched together to create this. And here it is here. So this is printed onto metallic canvas, again, which really, with the silver tones, it really reflects. It's got some awesome properties, and this is mounted with a silver fillet inside a white mesh frame. Now the choice of framing can really turn a photograph into a piece of art. And here it is here, superimposed on an interior. This next image here is a before shot of Kaikoura. I've been wanting to get a really great, unique sunrise image of Kaikoura for many years. So this was, I think, 2 years ago, and when I woke up and looked outside and saw these clouds forming, I thought, oh, hooray, this could be good. I got excited, so I got down here to the foreshore, and initially I didn't think that these were really going to colour up. It was taking ages, and it looked like only the clouds in the distance were going to turn colour. But as they say, patience is a virtue, and 17 minutes later, starburst. And I've got just to prove it's for real, I've got a video clip off my phone. Oh, sorry, before we do that. I checked the forecast at the time, and it said some clouds. Yeah, some clouds are right. So this little clip here, so you've got to excuse the exposure being a little bit light with the phone, but another interesting thing to note here is the fact that after I got the shots, I checked the tide chart, and this was actually only 2 hours before high tide. And this was, of course, after the earthquake, where a lot of the seabed was lifted up to 2 metres in parts. So, pre-earthquake, all of these rocks would have been underwater under these conditions. So, but the symmetry of the rocks to the clouds was quite extraordinary. Going from a dramatic sunrise to a sunset now, this was Mount Narahori at National Park a few months ago. That day had been really quite nasty weather all day, but that morning I checked the forecast, and you've really got to be you've got to have a crystal ball sometimes, but really understand the weather patterns as well, just to seek out those opportunities. And this was, I think, the forecast out was going to look for 6 o'clock. So to get that dramatic colour, you actually want cloud, but you need a bit of clear light on the horizon for that light just to penetrate. So I've got a video clip here, which let me play that. So this was, I zoomed in quite close on the camera, but quite extraordinary. But this went from grey skies and rain to this in less than 90 minutes. So everything changes so quickly. This image here, Dancing Mist, it was actually rain I was particularly looking for to bring these vertical cliffs near the Homer Tunnel on the road to Milford Sound alive. And this is a large composite file which I've stitched together like a big jigsaw puzzle, is the best way to describe it. So there's 20 separate telephoto images which I've stitched together to create one large file. But the weather forecast at the time looked pretty terrible, so I thought, great, let's go. And it predicted it was going to clear about 1 o'clock, and this was a quick snap on my phone at the time. It was just starting to lift. Here, so these are 4 of the 20 separate individual frames, and when you've got such a big file, that enables you to really display that detail at great sizes. This is quite beautiful where you've got the water sort of just splashing off the rocks, and the light, the sun was just coming out and just reflecting off the surface of the rock was quite awesome. But again, when you've got those big files, that enables you to go back. Here it is at the top left on a printed on the glass in a shower in Queenstown, in the Striker Lounge at Auckland International Airport, a laundry splashback in Christchurch. This is as a canvas triptych, 2 metres high, and then the bottom right was, that's in a home in Devonport, where the canvases are maybe 4.5 metres high. Another large series of works I did for the Auckland International Airport. This image of Castle Hill has been printed onto fabric, and that stands 4 metres high by 19 metres wide at Gate 17 in the departures terminal. Unfortunately, of course, not many of us can see that these days, but I've got a video clip here. This was at sunrise. It was quite a mission to get this, but this sort of gives you a better idea. It's difficult to really portray how cool this looks when you see it for real. It's quite amazing. But this was quite a tricky image to shoot. The light was changing on me a little bit. I'm shooting 4 frames high by 13 wide, so 52 frames total, and as the sun was rising, it hit some cloud, and that became a bit of a mission to bring it together. Another large composite, this is in one of the bathrooms in the security hall at the airport. This was an ancient Pukakawa at sunrise, at Pito Bay on the Coromandel. And similarly, this was 4 frames high by 7 wide. I'm currently working on a section of this image is being installed in a few weeks' time at a retirement village near Orewa. So when you've got these big files, you can do big things. It's quite exciting. But of all these large composite files I've pulled off, this particular one at Lake Kaitiaki was by far the most complex. This is a client's indoor pool in Russia. I was contacted 1 year by this photo agent. He had this client that was completing his big home, and he spends a bit of time here in New Zealand, and he wanted an alpine lake scene with autumn leaves. He wanted pink fluffy clouds, and I said, you can forget your pink fluffy clouds, knowing what's going to be involved. So anyway, we exchanged a few emails. I didn't hear any more, and then the following year he contacted me again. This home was complete, and he had a big blank wall. This is 28 metres wide by 3 metres high. So this particular scene, so I went off in search of, and I ended up shooting this as a 180-degree view, which I first captured at the end of April in the autumn. But when I shot that, all of the Alps to the left of Mount Cook were all bare, and exchanging emails backwards and forwards with my client, he wanted more snow-capped mountains. So I said, okay. How about I go back in winter and reshoot it again? So I did that. I went back in July, reshot everything again, and then I had the unenviable task of then putting all these autumn leaves back onto the bare trees. So when I go back here, so what you see here, the reflections, the snow is all in winter. That was all July, and the leaves, of course, you know, this tree here would have been bare, and I had to copy all the leaves back onto the same trees. This was the before shot that he took of the bare wall. But of course, this was 4 frames high by 30 frames wide, so 120 frames. And doing that process, I also had to repair, not only replace the leaves onto the trees, but the patterns for the ripples. He was very particular. I mean, he was paying a lot of money, granted, but the ripples, what was happening with, if you imagine carving that into 120 sections, when you go from one column to the next, by the time you get there, the wind has changed the shape of the reflections. So when you go to stitch it together, they don't join. So it was, all in all, it was a process. I sat there for about 3 weeks, repairing, putting the leaves back, repairing the reflections, and in the end we got there, and he was happy, so that was good. But the same morning that I shot the autumn leaf version, I came further down the shores of Lake Kaitiaki, and I was looking for any hidden little pockets of water where there might be some sneaky reflections of Mount Cook. So I went down this random track, and a tree had fallen over the road. So I stopped at that point and got out, had a look, and there was all these toadstools under the trees covered with these leaves. I thought, oh, cool, great. So I spent about half an hour taking pictures of these, and then of course I couldn't go forward. I had to back up the same track, and in that 30 minutes that had elapsed, the sun had now risen, and this tree, when I'd driven past it previously, was all in shadow, and now all of a sudden, boom, it was alive. Just stunning. So I call this Radium Jewels, and here it is enlarged 2 metres wide on canvas in a couple of Auckland homes. You know, with such vibrant colour, it's been a popular statement piece. This next image here with the rainbow up at Cape Reinga, capturing this a few years ago was a real pinch myself moment. Got some shots here. These top images here was the sunset the night before. Well, that didn't come to anything, that was pretty boring. So I thought, and it was a full moon, so I thought, right, let's get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. No, that was boring, didn't do anything. So I went back to bed for a couple of hours. I thought, okay, let's try sunrise. I went back, and initially it was raining, had to retreat back to the car, and then it stopped. Right, go and have another go. And then I just set up my equipment on the sloping ground, and I hadn't even levelled the tripod properly when this rainbow started to appear. And if I just zoom in on the timestamps here, just so you can see here, do this. Oops, no, sorry. Let's try that again. So, this is a little bit tricky with our mouse. Here we go. So you can see here, the rainbow was just starting to appear at 7:39 a.m. The next frame over, it was intense for about 30 seconds at 7:40. And then it was fading away 2 minutes later at 7:42. So you can safely say I was pretty pleased with that. These next two images are of an old gold mining town up above Arrowtown, a little old place called Macetown. And this top image here, the golden years and Valley of Gold. But when I first got up here, just skip a couple there. Getting up here is a real mission. I don't know if any of you have ever ventured up there. This was 10 years ago now when I went up here. I'd flown down, so I had a rental car, and I'm sure Budget would have been most impressed to see me driving their engine through the river. At one point I had the water lapping over the bonnet. Shit, don't stop now. And caution lead forward and all the plates of the cars that didn't quite make it. So, being such a mission to get there, when I first got up there, I was like, oh, and what can I shoot? So I spent some time, and this is the old bakery up there. It's one of only two buildings that remain, which have been restored by Doc. But the first image, the golden years, I simply chopped the top and bottom off that first frame. You can see I was looking into the sun mid-afternoon. The sun was quite low in the sky, being autumn. And, ordinarily that would be a no-no to be shooting into the sun, but sometimes you have to break the rules. And initially I thought that the other images here, I'd sport them with my hand being too low. But by the time I stitched those 5 together and then just cropped off a little bit, I was able to remove my hand. So, and here's the Valley of Gold in a triptych in Whitianga. So it was a mission well worthwhile. This next image here, High Country Muster, is quite a timeless image. You could have taken that 100 years ago and it really wouldn't have changed much. You've got the metal road, the musterer on horseback, but it almost didn't happen. This was on the road to Lake Clearwater, which is just inland from Mount Somers in Canterbury. And I was driving along, and when I saw the musterer and the cows on the road, I thought, oh great, there's a great image to be had here. So I stopped, and then of course the cows stopped. The musterer hurried them up, and then seconds later I took this shot. They were just all around me, and the shot was lost. So I was like, oh bugger. So thoroughly annoyed with myself, I continued up the end of the road to Erewhon Station, came back down, and then about an hour later, it would have been, I was then behind, the cows were still on the road, but now of course I was behind them. So I thought, great, now don't stuff this up. So I just stayed in the car and I shot that through the windscreen. My last image here, I call Jackpot, was one of those unplanned days. It's often when I find I get my best shots, they're not planned. The day before, I had planned a trip down Skipper's Canyon, and that proved quite fruitless. But it was only in the last second that I decided to take the Nevis Road and ended up here. I've got a quick video here, just I can show you that first. So this is what I saw as I came off the road. The first snow had fallen the night before, and this day the weather was just constantly changing. And unfortunately we don't have sound here, but I actually, when you can hear the sound, there was a rainbow just here. I was like, oh, rainbow. You know. So this is the tree here that I took that picture of, but we'll just go to the next slide here. So initially, I was attracted to all these leaves that were caught in the long grass, and they were beautifully backlit. So I was busy for half an hour mucking around here, and then I started to take pictures looking up Stewart's Gully here, and then for some unknown reason, something made me turn around, and then I just happened to look over my shoulder, and you know, there we are, this rainbow. But the wind and the driving rain was so challenging at that time, it was really difficult to get a clear shot. And you can see just on the right side of the rainbow there's a couple of droplets of rain on the lens. So I managed to get one shot, and then by the time I was able to clear the lens and get a second shot, the light and the rainbow had already started to fade. So, you know, again, you've got to, there's a bit of luck involved with these things, of course, but you've got to make the effort, do your homework, and be there, and take advantage of the opportunities and the conditions. But here it is here, a few examples. At the top left, printed on paper with a grey mat, and on paper in the top right with a white enamel frame around the canvas, or a black one here. So there's all these different framing options you can do to customise a piece for somebody's home. And it was also the image that I chose for the cover of my first book in 2017, Looking for the Light, which is really what sums it up for me. It's what it's all about, landscape photography. It's all about the light. And thank you very much for listening. And are there any questions?
I haven't got a question, but I'd like to speak on behalf of, I'm sure, all the other galleries around that have your work, and just a thank you. Your work is amazing.
Couldn't do it without you guys.
Yeah, but you know, you're precise. You are just really amazing, and we're really grateful.
Oh, thanks, Mary.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mel.
Yes.
Thank you.
All of the above.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do this without the support of my galleries, you know, and it almost become like a part of the family, really. And if you go to my website, peterlayton.com, you'll see the list of galleries that have my work, and please go and check them out. They're an awesome, awesome team, and you know, it's a team effort, really, bring these pictures to the market, because I couldn't do what I do without them. People don't have to have these pictures on their walls, so you've really got to put the hours in and go, you know, just make that extra effort. It's not easy, but it's very rewarding. So I wouldn't change it for anything.
Good for you.
Yeah.
You posed the question, is photography art? And having listened to your presentation, I can answer, yes it is, when the photographer is an artist.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess with photography, it is very accessible. I mean, like as I said at the start, it's great that everybody, these days with digital photography, it's so instant, so you can instantly see what you're looking at. So there's those tools which really help me when I'm out in the field. My iPhone is my best friend out there. I can shoot a panorama and visualize how it might be before I get all my gear out and set that up. It's a great tool. But of course, like any art form, there's great painters, there's average painters, there's all, it encompasses a wide range. But I think I'm right in saying, Kiwis, we're, the number 8 wire mentality, it still rings true. So, you sometimes you might hear people say, "Oh, I can do that." Well, and the thing also is that people only see the end result. They don't see the trips where you've come back empty-handed. They don't see all the other images that went, those ones that didn't work out. They're only seeing the good ones. So they think you have this marvelous life, in and out of helicopters and seeing this place and that. But I mean, in reality, I'd be lucky if I spend 10% of my time out in the field, probably more like 5%. When I do these trips away, I cram an awful lot into them, and I do my homework, and I know, well, I've got a good idea of what I'm aiming for. Usually that, you've got to be flexible. I think if you have two set too fixed on what you're looking for, that can be a hindrance, that can be a handbrake. You've really got to, you almost develop a bit of a sixth sense really, with the weather particularly, and you just sort of trust your instincts really and go with the flow. But you just have to get out there and take pictures. You're not going to see it sitting on the sofa at home, so you just got to give it a go.
Did you take photography at school or?
Not really. No. We didn't have any a photography class at school.
Which they do, of course, now.
Yeah.
But I wondered where this really.
Well, going back, tell my age now, but years ago, I always thought, back in the days where we used to put films in for processing and you'd get them a week or two later, and then by the time you get that packet of photos, you forget what you've taken. That could have been weeks, months ago. And I just got hooked. I thought that whole process was quite magical. So I don't know. I just sort of stuck to my knitting really, and just been a bit hard nosed with it, and try not to get sidetracked. And just stuck to my knitting really. I've done, I worked for a number of years on cruise ships overseas as a photographer, and I did a lot of weddings, a lot of portraiture, and I've done that to death really. So it was on one of the cruise ships, we're going back, 2002, we were still shooting everything on film. Digital was just, coming of age, and we got a large format printer on one of the ships I was on, and we were taking studio portraits on fulminates, scanning those onto just flatbed scanners, and then printing them onto canvas. So I just thought, this is really cool, like this. So I gave up floating around on the tin cans, came home, and one of the first things I did was get one of these large format printers and then just started playing with it. But fortunately, having that exposure to them on the ships, I was just a little bit ahead of people back here in New Zealand at that time, so I got a head start. Yeah. Yes.
We
when you start a year, do you go in with an idea that you want to have a certain number of finished works in a certain period?
So when I'm out there in the field.
Yeah, well, say at the beginning of 2020, you go, well, I'd like to have 6 pieces by the end of the year. That
No, it doesn't work like that.
so it's different in different years.
I mean, I have concentrated bursts where I go out on particular trips. Certain times of the year, I mean, for example, there's no guarantee. You know, you're so much at the mercy of the weather and the elements and what is dished up. December last year, I planned this big trip to Stewart Island. My sister from Switzerland was out, and I had my nephew and his young son. We had this major expedition. We flew into Dover Bay on the west coast of Stewart Island, and we were going to walk the Southern Circuit, but we got hammered with the weather, so we decided what we would fly in and fly out 4 days later. So a little bit of cheating, I guess, but stunning place, but we just didn't get lucky with the weather. And previous years, end November down south, I've always struck, you know, pockets of good weather, but it just didn't happen. So you've just got to take it on the chin, you know. But you don't want clear blue skies for, you know, you want some drama, and to get good light, you need cloud. So you have to take the chances. Yeah. Yeah.
So you get home and you look for shots, or do you look for shots and you know instantly which are the ones?
There will always be certain shots that you look at straight away and you think, yeah, money shot, yeah, that's great. And then other shots that you take at the time that you think are going to be great, and then you get home and think, oh, nah. You know. So, you know, there's if I go away and if I'm away for say 10 days and I might shoot a few hundred images, I'll be lucky if there's half a dozen.
But do you know instantly which ones they are? Is that experience?
No, not always. Sometimes you might go back through your files and you've missed certain images and you'll revisit them. And a lot of images, you know, where you're stitching together, yeah, it's funny, it's a bit random really. Sometimes you know straight away, and then other times they sort of reveal themselves later.
Are all your images made from multi-stitched files?
Whenever I can, I'll stitch them together. I mean, this image here, of course, that's a single frame. But I mean, these are all big files. I mean, this is shot on 100 megapixel phase 1. So, and that's with a 2x teleconverter. So it's equivalent to 300mm and 35mm speak. So, but I mean, that image there, just the single frame, I could enlarge that the size of this whole white area, and that would still be sharp. But you know, obviously the bigger the files, the better, because you never know when, you know, what project might come along and they need something big. So wherever I can, I'll always shoot. And even just when you're shooting, instead of, you learn tricks as you go along. Obviously, you know, you never stop learning with this. But instead of shooting horizontally, you get a lot more information if you tilt vertically and you shoot that way. So there's more, you know, you're shooting more frames horizontally and you'll end up with a much bigger file. But it also depends on the situation, what the conditions are. You might only have seconds to react and you might not have time. So sometimes it's better just to grab a shot and then, oop, light's still good, okay, grab net, and then you can change lenses and muck around. But if you miss it, there was a shot that I missed in the Marlborough Sounds a few years ago, and I still think of it because it was an evening sunset, and I was staying at Anakiwa, and just in front of where I was staying, there was a jetty, quite a long jetty going out into the water, and there were some yachts just anchored off. And I had an elderly friend with me who often comes away on some of these long trips with me. Her name is Nan. And I said, we had come back from dinner in Havelock just a little bit beforehand, and I just happened to say to her, oh, look at those little clouds, those nice fluffy clouds in the sky, isn't that nice? Didn't take any more notice. And then we got back inside, and I'm in the kitchen making a cup of tea, and then Nan says, oh, look now. I was like, oh, bugger, oh. And ran as quick as I could. But instead of stopping, I should have really stopped at the water's edge and taken something. But I gambled, no, I had to get to the end of the jetty. And it was a really long one. So I ran out to the end, looked up, yep, great, got the camera out, set everything, looked up, gone. You know, and it was one of those images that would, you know, you would be a book cover. It was amazing. You know, the gorgeous light with the yachts and the clouds reflecting in the water, just really calm. It was stunning. So I still remember it in my mind. Can't do much with that though. So you know, like I say, you never stop learning, but you've just got to be so quick. And it's in those moments where you're really under pressure, what you do becomes quite intuitive, and you just learn bang, bang, bang. You just don't have time to muck around. You know, it just changes so quickly. And the light, you know, when you set up and you're taking images, a whole series of images through that changing light, it changes so quickly. But if you can shoot the whole range, you know, because you never know. Just when you think it's not until you get home and you download them that you can then decide what the best images are. But if you only take a couple and that's it, you're probably missing the best part. Yeah. Anybody else?
Just an observation, Peter. It seems to me that there's art and there's technique, but there's also a lot of tenacity involved in your work. You don't seem to give up.
You've got to be really determined and passionate about it. Otherwise, you know, making those efforts in those wee hours. I mean, I think back to up at Cape Reinga. I mean, it's a long way to go. And if I'd given up after shooting in the middle of it, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when I tried the full moon, I could have quite easily stayed in bed in the morning, but I thought, no, come this way, get up, go on. You just got to push yourself. And, you know, there's no guarantees, but it's often when you least expect it, that's when all of a sudden, and that was just so freaky when that rainbow appeared. It was almost, you know, quite spiritual up there. You know, and there's no one, and when that's the other thing, is when you're there in these places on your own and these things are happening, it's really, it's almost like an out-of-body experience sometimes, you know. It's quite good. Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No.
Can your images go onto glass that can be used in bathrooms and backstage?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there were some images there that showed there was ducks and mist, which was on a laundry splashback. But yeah, kitchen splashbacks and all sorts. Glass, you know, feature doors, all of that. I mean, so that's where it's printed. There's different processes, but the company I use for that, where they print directly to the glass. So that's some processes will use it. They'll print onto a film, and then that will stick to the glass, but that's not as good. So you want it printed directly to the glass. Yeah. But there's so many things you can do. Great.
Peter, do you see technology advancing from here very much? I mean, to us it's all like you've reached the epitome, but where does this end?
Well, where does it end? I think with, certainly with, you know, in the last, well, 20 years, say, we've seen phenomenal developments in technology. Not only with cameras going from film to digital, but also with printing technology. The printer I use at home, it's a large format 44-inch inkjet printer, and that's my third one I'm on now, and the quality that I get out of that it's awesome. So I think any improvements on that now, it's incremental changes. Certainly with digital photography, manufacturers are obviously keen to develop new tricks to keep us buying new equipment. But you can only, you know, there's a limit, a balance between the number of pixels, and also you've got to have the lens quality to resolve the detail with those pixels. So the equipment I'm using now, phase 1, so the lenses on that, they're designed to resolve detail at 150 megapixels. So, you know, the sharpness out of those is phenomenal. And I mean, really, any future improvements, our eyes aren't developing, you know, as we all get older, our eyesight's not as great, so are we really going to see these things? There is there's a limit, really, and we're probably close to it. Yeah. Anyone else?